your new book is kind of about the failure of the Philippines developmental state experience, something along those lines, right? Or shortcomings of macroprudential, semi-new liberal and eventually new liberal economics, right? But obviously, hindi yan nag-work eh. Kasi the average Filipino's living standard is still not there. I mean, coming a middle class, I can sense it na pag-iwanan talaga tayo ng ibang middle class in Vietnam and many other countries. So, don't you think we're reaching a point of essentially a critical juncture where talagang inflection point na kailangan talaga na the Philippines embraces something new. Otherwise, delikado to eh. Diba? Or
Si
do you think
Jokno
we're
is a
just gonna be
perfect example,
complacent
di ba? May,
forever and
kasi
bahala ng buhay?
outside, ewan ko may nangyayari kasi sa kanila, pag pumapasok sila sa gobyerno, nagiging macro-prudential. Pag nasa labas ng gobyerno, ang lakas mag-propose ng industrial policy or the
Ah,
fundamental rethinking of the economic premises of the Philippines. So for example, si Jokno, kaaway yan ng central bank noong 1990s. Noong panahon ni Ramos, tinawag nga yan ng central bank na jukebox economist. Jukebox meaning maglalagay ka ng pera tapos kakantahin niya yung gusto mong kantahin.
yeah.
Ganyan kagalit ang central bank kay Diokno nung panahon na yon. Because in the 1990s, in order to avert the Asian financial crisis, Diokno along with Fabella,
Right.
Calixto Chiquiamco, Noel de Dios, they proposed a strategic depreciation of the peso.
Right.
Alam mo na ito, obsession ko, Richard, di ba? The
Of
strategic
course, of
depreciation of
course.
the peso. Ngayon, si Diokno na naging central bank governor, so he was placed in the position na parang ito na yung pantasya niya noong 1990s, 'di ba? Strategically depreciate the peso. Hindi niya ginawa, 'di ba? I mean,
Yeah.
he was associated with this cause for like years. So bakit importante yung strategic depreciation of the currency? Because it is the ultimate, paulit-ulit na, it is the ultimate protectionist measure for your exporters, di ba? It's the ultimate form of protectionism. Kaya nga yung mga nagde-depreciate ng peso, nagagalit ang US tinatawag na currency manipulator. Ang Vietnam tinatawag na currency manipulator right now. So I think there's something really about yung nature ng central bank na kapag pumasok ka, iba yung demands on
So
you.
Lele,
At
what you're
saka
saying is
nagiging
that the
accountable ka to a
bureaucracy,
certain banking class. I don't
right?
know. Pero yung central bank, I really think the central bank should be reformed. That's one thing.
Oh,
It is
kasi
the institution that really, really should be reformed. Kasi, kasi tingnan mo ang Indonesia actually nag-central bank reform yan. Kasi ang central bank ng Indonesia was until I think 2010 very much like our central bank, inflation targeting bank. Walang developmental goal. So single mandate central bank. Nag-reform na ang Indonesian Central Bank, dual mandate na yan. Parang
Right,
US
right.
Fed may developmental goal na. Yung central bank natin, wala pa ring developmental goal. So what that means on paper is, given a choice between ultra-low inflation, growth and employment, and developmental goals, the central bank will always choose the former.
The
Diba?
inflation.
Wala siyang balance. Ngayon yung mga ibang central bank, binabalansin nila yung goals ng development at goals ng low inflation. Yung central bank natin, walang ganyang klaseng goal. Kaya ang sabi nga ni governor, ng governor ng central bank, we are an inherently hawkish central bank. Kaya
Yeah.
kita mo kung mag-slash ng rates ang central. Do you know, for example, the Philippines, itong last wave ng inflation, tayo yung pinaka-aggressive nagtaas ng interest rate sa buong
Right.
Asia. Pinaka-aggressive. Ngayon, umaaray, mismong si RC Balisacan, umaaray na. Sinasabi niya, Gov, masakit na po, masakit na Gov. Walang pakialam si Governor.
Wag po,
Because
wag po.
meron kang myth of central bank independence, which is actually bullshit, yung myth of central bank independence. Ano yung other institution na so-called independent sa Pilipinas? Is the Supreme Court, di ba? Appointed pero hindi mo na pwedeng tanggalin. Tapos
Right.
nominally independent. Pero lahat ng Pilipino, alam naman nila na bullshit ang Supreme Court independence, na bahagi yan ng politika. And yet when we think about
Wala
the
akong
central bank,
sinabi ah. Wala kaming sinabi ni Ronald.
And then when we think about the central bank, we can't apply the same kind of cynicism. Naniniwala tayo na talagang beyond politics yan. Ulul mo kung beyond politics yan. Central bank is part of the politics of the Philippines, and central bank has stakeholders, may accountability yan. And it's accountable to a particular banker class na ang gusto lang nila, protect the value of their assets as opposed to grow the economy, right?
Yes.
So kailangan, so
Thanks
sa
for
ako
pointing
talaga,
that out.
fundamental reorientation of central bank, and then Filipinos should actually, care about the central bank the way they care about the Supreme Court, which is not a lot, but they care about the Supreme Court more than they do
Very
the
good
central
point.
bank.
Very good. Leloy, sorry, I want to push you on this because I want this to be the last part of our discussion. Again, this is what I find unique, no? So, ganito kasi, we always talk about oligarchs. We always talk about political dynasties and trapos as the menace to the Philippine democracy and political economy. But what one I and Leloy have been emphasizing over the past year or so since some of our kerfuffle with some of our friends there is that you also have to look at the role of Filipino technocrats. And one thing interesting Lelo is saying here is that even yung mga progressive or matino mag-isip, once nandun na sila sa loob, there's just something with the bureaucracy, the financial banking bureaucracy in the Philippines that makes them standard, quote-unquote, new liberal, macroprudential kind of technocrat. Ikaw, Ronald, you were the odd man out in the Aquino administration. And one of the criticism against the Aquino administration was, okay, maayos yung macroprudential, but there was nothing really significant in terms of industrial and trade policy, no? I mean, ganyan ba kalakas? Ito ba yung deep state talaga ng Philippines? Hindi yung mga trapoy. Ito ba talaga yung deep state? Leloy, I'll push it. Is the new liberal technocracy the deep state? And just to make it clear, yung sinasabi ni Leloy is, yung mga mayayaman sa Pilipinas who have a lot of savings, they have an interest na mababa yung inflation. Because if the inflation is higher than interest rate, they're losing a lot of money every year. So having a low inflation strategy is good for the richest people, but not necessarily always for the poorest people
Oo,
if it
kasi
doesn't
kasi
lead to
asset kasi
increasing
ang
real
tsaka
wages.
isa pa, so sasabihin ko, yung ganyang klaseng anti-inflation is asset protection. Ang
Yes,
anti-inflation na
yes.
hinahanap ng mga masa is reducing food inflation na madalas
Yes.
walang kinalaman sa interest rate,
Correct.
taripa,
Yes.
Correct,
production
correct, correct.
processes. So yung ito yung canard ng central bank sasabi nila anti-inflation kami dahil gusto namin mahirap. Pero the interest rate na ginagamit nila is such a blunt tool for reducing the prices of the things that the poor really need, which
Right.
is food. Gumagana siya in terms of protecting bond prices and asset prices na mayaman naman ang may pakialam. Kaya huwag niyo tayong lokohin na pro-poor yung anti-inflation agenda
Kasi
ng
sinabi mo na yan,
central bank.
Leloy. Sana itatanong ko sa iyo kanina. Yung mga anti-inflation moves ba ng central bank in relation sa interest rates ay talaga bang nag-work sa food inflation, no? Dahil usapin niya ng productivity Usapin niya,
Yes.
hindi naman yan, hindi naman yan
Mismo.
demand side
Galing talaga ni Ronald.
Oh.
Organic yan eh. Organic intellectual talaga.
Kaya,
Galing.
sabi ko
Ronald,
ni
that was a very
Leloy,
good point.
dun sa, pero
I like that point. Very good.
ayun nga paano, ang strong point naman kasi nung gobyerno ni Pinoy ay anti-corruption. Diba?
Right.
Yun yung kanyang strong point. Yung economic paradigm ay hindi naman talaga na-set di ba? At ang hirap din gumawa ng economic paradigm na bago, no, in less than 6 years. Dahil yung 1 year mo is a learning curve at yung last year mo ay lame duck.
Yeah,
So
so you have
practically
4 years, yeah.
you have to implement a new economic paradigm in 4 years, no? And we don't have an ideological state, no? Kaya where do we start? No,
Yeah.
yan yung magiging usapin
Pero
natin
Ronald,
Future.
I'll push back against you, no? Because Biden, just 2 years into office, many economists and many journalists believe that he has actually introduced an industrial policy revolution in America. Now, of course, you can argue that there was the pandemic, there was the Donald Trump protectionism, but if you really studied, and I actually, I forwarded by Furuhar, this very good article about end of new liberalism in America since Biden came to power, no? Sobrang laki nung contribution to infrastructure development, building high-tech industry. So in 2 years, Biden was able to make that transformation. And I'll go even more historically. Look at the contribution of Abraham Lincoln. In barely 3 or 4 years, he transformed America's history and by even human history, right? So I get what you're saying, Ronald. So is your argument, Ronald, is that the Philippine state is just so weak that 4 years is not the same as 4 years in America, including 19th century America? I mean, I get your point, Ronald. Pero ang point ko is, pwede maging excuse yan. Ay, sorry, kulang lang 4 years. But, I can give you many examples of massive transformation in 2 or 3 years of presidency. in other
Yes, pero
comparable
the
democracies.
US state is not like our state.
Right.
No, it's kahit pa paano naman the US state has an ideological
Right.
moorings yan no, kumpara sa atin, no. Yung sa atin talaga nagbabago yan every 6 years di ba? So yun yung isang kaibahan na pwedeng magkaroon ng ganyang klaseng Biden economics, no, within
Right.
the nature of the US state. Sa Pilipinas, how much can you change? No? How much can you change? Dahil ang daming mga fundamental na kailangan mong baguhin no? Halimbawa, napag-usapan namin ni Pinoy yung mga cartels, no?
Yeah.
At medyo inclined siya na durugin yung mga yan, no? Pero may rule of law Sabi ko nga sa kanya, boss, huwag mo napansinin yung rule of law. Hindi natin
Ayan
madudulog
tayo
yung mga cartels na yan
Yeah.
kung puro rule of law tayo. No? Kakampi ko pa nga si Senator Magsaysay nung
Correct.
kinakausap namin si Pinoy tungkol dyan. No?
Correct.
Dahil gusto niyang, gusto niyang simulan ng katayin yung cartel
Medyo magdigong na siya,
Hamstrung
essentially.
siya ng hamstrung siya ng judiciary, which is not the most just in the region no, as well. No? So, nung nag-session tayo yung first session natin sa Real, di ba?
Yes.
Ang tanong mo sa akin, gusto mo maging digong? Tama pala si digong, no?
Yeah.
Di ba?
Di ba, yun yung real talk mo, di ba? May TikTok video tayo about that. I can share it. Maganda yung TikTok video na could you be a good dictator to shake up the system, no? In terms of, ikaw, Leloy, realistically, short of going, hindi naman, of course, Digong was really fake anti-oligarch because he had his own Duterte-garchs, but short of a dictatorship route, no? What can we do here? Kasi, Leloy, I think we're doing the first step, which is exposing the very negative impact of the technocratic class in the Philippines, who essentially have served the interests of the capitalist, the bourgeois class here.
Siguro, dagdag din dyan,
Yes.
Richard, no? Leloy, meron ba tayo kahit maliit na modernizing elite? Or at least man lang,
Yeah. Good point.
A section of that. Dahil, kung wala kasi yan, talagang socialism should be the agenda. Kung wala man lang na modern...
Papunta na tayo sa exciting part sa end.
Alam mo, ang sagot ko dyan parang manipis, di ba? Pero naalala yung tumakbo si Gibo. Meron talagang small segment ng mga liberal, even some socialists saying na parang he's so reminiscent of an old kind of modernizing elite sa Pilipinas, yung kind of 1950s bureaucrat na maalam, malalim mag-isip, ganyan, very technocratic. And siguro parang Mahathir, maybe can quote some philosophers, kagaya na nabanggit natin. Mahathir, Anwar, pareho kay Ronald. Confused natin si Anwar at si Mahathir.
Matalino rin si Mahathir.
I wonder what that says.
Good evening. I'm gonna be a bit German.
Ako yung favorite ko dyan, of course, si Salvador Araneta. Matagal ko nang sinasabi sa mga listeners natin na dapat tignan yung early.
That's a good
call it
example.
Christian democracy. Pero actually, kung babasahin ngayon, makikita natin talaga na social democracy yung pinopromote niya at elite siya. And actually, one of the reasons why hindi pinapakinggan si Salvador Araneta ay dahil inilit tag siya or inilit bait. Sinabi dahil close siya to sugar interests na he can't care about the country as a whole. And so tainted forever yung legacy niya ng connection siya with the sugar industry. Hindi natin
Very interesting
siniseryoso
point.
yung kanyang mga ideas, which were,
no.
Kasi yung peso depreciation, for example, one of the reasons bakit ayaw yan nakaliwa. Kasi naging agenda yan ni Nasikat, naging agenda yan ni Virata. So it became coded as right-wing. Pero actually, the first proponent of strategic peso depreciation was Salvador Araneta, who squarely placed himself on the left and was actually exiled by Ferdinand Marcos. In fact, sabi niya, salamat Ferdinand Marcos at din-appreciate mo yung peso, pero number one, it's too late. Number two, you don't need to be a dictator to do that. So, may ganyan talagang tradition, yung kind of Araneta tradition, strategic peso depreciation, export protection, and we call it full employment, Christian social democracy, na pwedeng buhayin. And alam ko there's a lot of interest now. Malapit nang buksan ang full archive ni Salvador Araneta. Nag-hire na sila finally ng archivist. And actually, I feel like, a lot of our elites should read the story of si Don Badong, who's I think the
Interesting. So
great
your argument,
the
Lelo,
great
is
understudied elite modernizer of the 20th century.
so your argument, Lelo, is there could be kind of a noble oblige or conservative, socially, politically, but economically progressive, which is essentially the story of all our neighbors, right? Whether this is Lee
Yeah.
Kuan Yew, whether this is the Japanese LDP
Oh.
party, whether this is Kuomintang in Taiwan, they were all socially, politically conservative who had developmental economic policy, right?
Yeah,
Richard, wala ka-
Katoliko sarado si Don Badong eh. Oh, yes.
Pero ngayon ba may nakikita kang ganon? No? Ako wala akong
Yeah,
makita.
we thought Marojas is that guy, right? I mean, some thought Marojas could be that guy, kind of a noble oblige, one of the elite, but at least naisip niya, blah, blah, blah. Pero wala na, naging masyadong politiko na eh. If ever he had it
Actually,
in him.
naisip ko lang, sobrang relevant yun ni Don Badong because the only cabinet portfolio
I really
he
like
ever
that
held
point.
was
Ang galing,
Secretary
galing.
of Agriculture, which
Galing,
might be the
galing,
most
galing.
important cabinet portfolio today. So dapat talaga pag-isipan ulit yung kanyang legacy. I don't know. I mean, what do you guys think of Gibo Teodoro?
That's a very good point, bro. Let's end on Gibo na lang. We wanted to end on Marcos Jr. He became irrelevant suddenly. Ikaw, Ronald, kasi si Gibo, obviously may planong magpresidente ulit. I mean, I can
Yes,
sense
he has
that.
a-
Everyone
he
is
has
telling me
ambitions.
inside. Oo.
Kaya hindi sila ganun ka-close ni Speaker.
Yeah.
They look at each other as potential rivals, no? Ang problema, both of them ay medyo mababa sa polls, no? Yung dalawa na yan, no?
But that could be fixed, di ba? If Sara is marginalized and Rafi Tulfo is convinced not to run for the presidency but settle for VP, pwede, di ba?
Tulfo will run.
Yeah, but you know, eventually Tulfo may be convinced to run as VP, no? Or you think he's gonna go for gold na?
For now, I think he will go for the...
For the gold, no? Oo.
Yeah. Dun sa...
Masyado siyang mataas sa
Pero-
survey.
Oh, masyadong mataas, lalo if Sara goes down, no? Oo.
Parang parang magiging parang graceful. Yung, parang ako yung mataas sa survey, bakit ako yung magsa-slide down? Parang may ganyang sense ata mangyayari kay Rafi Tulfo, no?
Si Isko rin dati at some point, ganun din. Diba? So, I like that. Yeah.
Pero balik tayo, ano tingin nyo kay Gibo? I mean, may modernizing impulse ba si
That's a
Gibo?
very... Ikaw, Rona, I want to start with you. Kayo muna, kasi actually, napaisip ako. Thank you, Leloy, that came out of nowhere, ah. Hindi ko na-expect na we'll end on Gibo in our first episode.
Kasi
But this
babalikan
is
ko
good.
si Frankie Sionil Jose. Yun yung isa sa mga huling sinabi niya sa akin. I was around during the period of our great modernizing elites, 1950s, 1960s. Tapos sabi niya sa akin, this Teodoro reminds me of these people. Yun yung sabi ni Frankie sa akin.
Very interesting. Very interesting.
Well, siyempre, at least nakalaya na siya doon sa taint ni GMA. No? Parang isa yun sa naging millstone niya nung tumakbo siya. Diba? One of the most presidents ang kanyang backer at saka endorser. No? Kaya medyo nasira siya ron. Maliban pa dun sa kanyang handling ng isang typhoon. Ang typhoon lang pala, hindi niya kayang ayusin. So yun. Pero yung dati kasing strength ni Gibo ay yung kanyang relationship with Danding.
Right.
Na nag-unravel din. Kaya hindi ko alam kung sino pa yung iba niyang supporter at this point. No? Para siyang Lone Ranger.
Yeah, that's a good
Kaya
point.
pag sinabi ko na a section of the elites, then I'm talking about a section of the elites, not an individual elite.
Oo.
Yun
That's
yung
analysis na
sinasabi
ako.
ko
Yeah.
na may pagka-modernizing. Na for now, hindi ko nakikita. Now, kahit yung mga Ayala, pinapackage yung sarili nila as
Yes,
modernizing.
good point.
They're just as trend-seeking as all the other Taipans.
And also Aboitis.
Kaya wala akong
Aboitis.
nakikita at this point.
Also Aboitis. Oo.
Tsaka yung elites din natin hindi nagsusugal para i-grow yung economy in new directions. Napaka-conservative din, no? Kahit yung pagpapayaman nila, napaka-conservative
It's
ng pagpapayaman
tried and
nila.
tested.
Pwede ka
Car
pwede ka naman
manufacturing.
magpayaman na may konting riesgo na parang talaga mag-grow yung economy.
Walang VinFast.
Outward looking talaga para dumami talaga yung trabaho dito at dumami talaga yung foreign exchange. Hindi sila ganun. Conservative
Halimbawa, at yung Aboitis, masarap kausap yung mga yan, no? Yung
Matalino.
mga
Oo,
kapatid.
matalino mga yan.
Pero grabe ang regulatory capture nila. Talagang sila ngayon ang icon ng regulatory capture, lalo na sa energy. No? at pumapasok pa siya sa iba. Kaya wala kang makita eh. No?
Yeah.
Gibo is an elite individual, but not a section of the elites.
Yeah.
Yun yung magiging pandyan.
Romualdez, what
Yeah.
about si Martin? I mean, he's quite smart. I heard good things about him when he was in Cornell back in the day. Matalino, maayos mag-isip. I mean, obviously, traditional
Yung anak
politician.
niya nandun din daw ulit. Nasa Cornell din.
Oh, tapos may Harvard Tagalog program daw na ano, di ba? So, I don't know. Maybe he's the guy.
Hopefully, pero...
Aba, Ronald, tumawa ka lang Tumawa ka lang
Hindi, yung mga
Baka may plano ka sa Congress
yung mga nakapaligid kasi sa kanya leaves much to be desired. So, tell me who your friends are or who your political allies are and I'll tell you who you are. So baka kinakailangan niyang ayusin yon. Dahil sa ngayon, yung head ng kanyang APRO, si Saldico, di ba?
Right.
So, yung kanyang so yun yung magiging problema ni
Gets
Martin. Hindi siya makaalis dun sa kanyang not only class, no, kundi yung kanyang circle of rent seeking and not too clean politicians.
So in that sense, Gibo is a bit more removed, more of a sovereign mind, more of a potential curveball in a good way. If
Yes,
ever,
but
of course, he makes it to the
for now,
presidency.
he's an individual.
Interesting.
Not a political party, not a group, or not even a section of the elites.
Interesting. Very interesting. Ikaw, Leloy, last point to close this third episode of our makasaysayan na RRL. This is good. I like it. Actually, ang dami ko naisip bigla. I'm gonna write them down. I really appreciated this. No, this I really didn't see Gibo. I mean, but you're absolutely right, Leloy. This is like your guy. Your guy from the 1950s. Very interesting. Leloy, last points.
Tinatanong ko lang, wala akong exposure kay Gibo. Ang marami lang fans niya, including yung tsuhin ko na predecessor ni Ronald na ganun din ang sinasabi about him.
Interesting.
Pero yeah, I don't know. Kaya ako nagtatanong, wala ako ganun alam tungkol kay Gibo. Alam ko as a debater, sobrang is one of the most impressive debaters I've ever seen as a politician. Pero yun lang alam ko.
And ikaw, Ronald, last points to close this episode. Let's remember, this episode was supposed to be about Marcos Jr. Is Marcos Jr. the precursor to some more interesting version of Noble Oblige?
I don't know.
I mean, do you think that the Marcos Jr. administration, marginalizing Duterte's, bringing some sanity to our politics, this could at least create the breathing space for a revitalized opposition? Essentially, like not by intention but by byproduct of Marcos Jr. style of approach. Baka naman medyo maayos-ayos ang lalabas. Gibo will rise, Riza will rise, I don't know, the far left will go to the center. I mean, you never know, right? I mean, ikaw, Ronald, if there's gonna be some more positive take on Marcos Jr.'s legacy, which was this episode, right?
Well, yes and no. Yes, dahil yung inaasahan na negative about him hindi nangyari, which is a repeat of the father, mukhang hindi na mangyayari yan, Ang problema nga ay yung iba sinasabi sana mas naging katulad siya ng father. Who's very decisive, very strong, etc. Yung sinasabi na sana may kaunti siyang ganon, to resolve itong mga ganitong klaseng mga away, mga problema. Again, katulad ng sinabi ko kanina, ang biggest weakness niya is hindi ganun kaklaro anong gagawin niya sa economy. Walang at sa ngayon wala man lang kaunting indicative framework, maliban sa Maharlika na hanggang ngayon hindi ko maunawaan bakit pinipilit. Diba? Itong Maharlika na ito.
Kasi wala nang iba I mean, what else? You're right Because Digong in his first 6 months, alam natin what he wants to happen. We didn't agree with him. But you know what? With Pinoy, first years too, alam natin anong mangyari kay Pinoy. Diba? He wanted to. So, but with magto 2 years na ito, hindi ko pa rin alam ano ba talaga to? So, is it just clean up muna for 2 years?
Exactly, Pero, ayun nga, ang strength naman ito, meron kang political space Lalo na pag
Yes.
natabi itong mga
Good point.
reactionary Duterte, maitabi yan, di ba? Ganito ka capacitive yung kanyang foreign policy. No?
Right.
Ganito capacitive yung kanyang at least compared to his predecessor, yung respect for civil liberties,
Right.
no, and human rights, no. Bagaman meron pa ring mga nangyayari, masyadong malaki yung difference from the Tokhang moment ni Digong, no. So yan, pero the elephant in the room is the economy, no. Hindi ko nakikita kung anong
Yeah.
plano niya eh. No? Maliban doon sa pinagmamalaki niya itong $90 billion in MOU sa kanyang 16 trips abroad.
Wala, hindi na bebenta yan eh. Nagawa ni Digong yan eh. That's wala na, laos na yung ganyan na pledge diplomacy. Thank you so much, Ron. I appreciate
Pero
that. Yeah, go Leloy.
Ako, babalik tayo kay Marcos. Sana man lang on the economy, wag mag-regress from Duterte. Kasi say what you will about Duterte, sabi ni Charmaine Ramos, gumawa siya ng pag-aaral, na si Duterte had the highest levels of social spending as compared to any other post-EDSA president. Ngayon, susukatin si BBM, dapat sukatin si BBM dyan. Gano'ng kataas ba yung social spending mo as a percentage of your budget? Hindi ko pa alam yung sagot kasi siguro ba too early on to see pa yung overall projection ng spending arc nila.
Right.
Pero sana, kung hindi man mag-improve, wag man lang sana mag-retrogress. Kasi kung smaller ang social spending mo kay Duterte, edi you're no worse than you're worse pa than the mass murderer on the economy. So, that would be really
Pero
big.
ang problema Leloy ni BBM, no? Halos bankrupt.
Exactly.
Ah,
Magagawa ni Digong yan dahil kay Pinoy.
kay
Ang dami
Digong-
na-save ni Pinoy eh.
Kay Digong, nag-iwan kami almost.
Oh,
of
exactly.
savings.
Thanks to Aquino.
And a good economy, no, to say the least, no, nung pumunta siya. Ito si BBM,
Oh.
medyo hirap siya. No? So,
Pero,
wala siyang pang ayuda. Si Digong, ang daming pang ayuda eh. Ang dami niya pwedeng gamitin sa social spending. Maliban pa sa record high debts.
Right.
No?
Mm.
Oh, yun yung
Ito lang, okay pa naman ang credit rating natin. Ang room natin para sa utang, decente pa. Hindi
Oo.
pa naman ganun.
Investment grade.
Kasama.
Investment grade.
Pangalawa, sa tingin ko, globally, naniniwala pa rin ang mga tao na dapat bigyan ng konting puwang ang third world countries to spend after the COVID pandemic.
Right.
Ngayon nga, actually, I was supposed to attend kaso nag-overtime tayo. I was supposed to attend may talk ang finance minister ng Indonesia sa amin.
Ay,
ngayon.
sorry bro.
Ongoing-
Sorry pare.
Dalawa
Sorry,
ko lang.
sorry.
Papanurin ko dapat. Pero sabi niya talaga, ang sabi ng direction talaga, ang theme ng talk niya is called fiscal policy over monetary policy for the third world.
Very
So
good, very
naniniwala
good.
siya na wala nang room for monetary policy, na maliit ang room for monetary policy for the third world ngayon. Dapat talaga ang pang-jumpstart natin ng may economy ay fiscal policy. And so, parang indicative to of yung mood sa Southeast Asia. Kung gano'n na mag-isip ang finance minister ng Indonesia, na pwede pa rin sakyan ni Bongbong. Pwede siyang sabihin na natin bumaba ng konti compared to Duterte. Huwag lang sobrang mag-collapse yung fiscal
But Lelo, I don't think he can even afford that with food inflation already dipping into his popularity, bringing down conditional cash transfers and other kind of measures. I don't think he can even afford it politically. Yeah.
Sabihin natin bumagsak ng konti, wag lang mag-crater.
Yeah.
And I'd like our economists siguro to start studying na yung spending patterns ngayon pa lang. At saka yung importante dyan, yung balance. Say bumaba yung pie, percentage naman spent on social spending ang pinag-uusapan natin, di ba?
Right.
Dapat tumataas yung porsyento na napupunta sa social services kahit bumaba yung overall pie.
Leloy, even recognizing yung mga positive elements na nabanggit mo, yung isang element naman ng ating global economy ngayon, it's very competitive lalo na sa ating region. No?
Yeah.
Halimbawa, in the past few decades, yung ating OFW are very dominant no, in the sa labor market. Itong next decade, with our deteriorating educational system,
Manganganib,
at yung scaling up ng ibang mga
Yeah.
ka-level natin, no, sa third world, no, they will give us a run for our money, no? Example
Yeah.
lang yun, ha?
Kakatakot.
Itong OFW. Ibig
Saka
sabihin,
yung call center natin kakainin ng AI.
Yeah.
yan, no? Iyan yung ating
Yeah.
one of our few strengths, no?
We had a whole episode on that eh. Oo. Kaya nga,
Yeah.
that's my point, Ronald. My best wish is, all we're seeing right now is a war of position that will place Bongbong Marcos eventually in the position to make the big decisions. Because mahirap mag-big decision kung the Dutertes are breathing down your neck. Mahirap mag-position kung hindi pa klaro saan yung foreign policy natin, sinong aliado natin. So, ito yung optimistic scenario. I'm not saying it's likely, but the optimistic scenario is that the first 2 to 3 years of BBM is cleaning up the house, and then he's gonna use his legacy years for big moves that could surprise us. That's the cautiously optimistic one. Where it's gonna happen, I don't know. But at least we discuss possibilities of, even if hindi yung left or kaliwa or a populist takes over, if a bunch of more modernizing elite within the BBM posh people, figure out that hindi na sustainable itong status quo, maybe they'll do not 10 out of 10, but siguro 4 out of 10 some interesting moves on industrial and trade policy, etc. So that's how I read it, Ronald. Or that's also how I hope it will end up, because the alternative is kick the can down the road, muddling through, and in 5 years from now, kakainin tayo ng mga kapitbahay natin, kakainin tayo ng artificial intelligence, at kakainin tayo ng all sorts of internal problems na hindi na-resolve. And nakakatakot yung ganyan scenario. So I rather nudge the administration, because I know there's some people, including bourgeois Wall Street people, listening to us sometimes. You never know, Ronald. I hope they're listening to us, because our analysis is hindi sustainable yung status quo. It's time to make some big moves. So I'm just hoping war of position pa rin tayo. Then we go to the war of maneuver, very Gramsci, by 2024 or 2025. That's how I put it. Yeah.
Ang problema nitong 1.5 years ni BBM, no? Usually, he makes decision by not making a decision. No? So, yun yung nangyayari.
Yin yang.
Kailangan magbago yun.
Medyo by default. All right. Thank you so much, guys. Nagka-crash na lahat ng phones ko, lobat na lahat. Sorry, ang tagal natin nag-usap. This is 2.5 hours almost. Wow. I mean, it just shows.
Okay, I prefer you guys to the finance minister
Yeah,
of Indonesia.
Leloy, don't worry. You won't regret it, but you can get but I look forward to seeing the outline, because thanks to you. Oo nga, no? Because for a long time, the Berkeley boys, new liberal Berkeley boys dictated Indonesia's economic policy, the whole Suharto era,
Saka saan
etc.
makakabili ng libro ni Leloy? Hindi ko nga alam na may libro sa
Oy,
Leloy.
send mo na yung pa-review mo na kay Ronald. Oh.
Pinapadala ko sa inyo, hindi pa lumalabas. Pinapadala ko pa kayo.
Oh, pero Ronald, basahin mo yung kay Araneta, 'di ba? Yung chapter.
Yeah.
Nabasa mo, 'di ba? Ang galing. I really appreciate that.
Yun yung isang takeaway ko dito sa ating
Ang galing.
session.
Ang galing.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, guys.
Thank
I
you.
really appreciate it. I think the first RRL series of episodes, alam niyo man, chinop-chop natin para Ilocano style. Squeeze out. The responses were super good. Ang gagaling pa nga mga nagko-comment dito eh. Talagang kung ano nung tanong-tanong mga economic, etc. So, that means we are engaging people even if it's 2 a.m. almost in the Philippines. So, Sir Ronald, thank you so much to pagod ka. Mas madaldal ka pa sa akin. So, I imagine, grabe. Para kang,
Hindi masyado. Nandiyan si Leloy eh.
para kang Isabelo de los Reyes pala. You have so much energy, it can electrify the world, right? And Leloy,
Gusto ko makulong sa Spain.
ayan, Barcelona. And thank you so much, Leloy. I'm sorry we got a little bit of your energy and time in the morning, but I hope we made it worth your time. I really wish that. Salamat, bro.
Okay.
God bless. Finally, we made it happen.
Bye-bye.
Talk to you
Good
soon.
night, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
God
Bye.
bless. Wow! Mga kameta, pasensya na. I know, nag-crash itong phone ko ng ilang beses. Nag-crash itong YouTube natin ng 3-4 times. Yung isang phone ko, wala na, awanin. Ano pa yan, Ang laki ng battery niya, naubos talaga eh. So, pasensya na talaga. But, wow, ang dami ko natutunan in the sense that na-refine ko yung some of my own ideas and even if ang tagal namin nagdadaldalan with Leloy and nagdadaldalan with Ronald Llamas, nakailan oras na kami ng episodes, etc. Every time we discuss, and the more we brainstorm, ang dami namin natutunan. So I hope you guys, you appreciate it. papahinga muna natin si Ronald Diamas kasi kasi ano na eh. Whew! Ang tagal namin nag-usap. So I hope you guys appreciate it. And on that note, thank you very much. Yung mga ka-DDS natin si Roy, as always, very supportive of us. And hope you have more of this. So please, continue to support us. And don't worry. There'll be the nice, clean version na i-upload natin soon, God willing. No? Para makita niyo yung mga guests natin ng mga guwapings. Diba? Pasensya na. Ito, ano lang to.